When we talk about feared gods, we are referring to deities that generate a mixture of fear and reverence among people. These entities are not just figures of worship, they represent forces of nature and deeper concepts that are often beyond human comprehension. The fear that people felt towards these gods was linked to their ability to influence life and death, abundance and scarcity. In my spiritual journey, I have come to realize that fear can be a powerful factor, driving us to seek answers and meaning. Often, these gods were seen as guardians of a fragile balance, where any deviation in worship practices could result in devastating consequences. This symbiotic relationship between humans and feared deities was, in many cases, a reflection of the desire for control in a world full of uncertainty. These deities teach us that fear has an important role in our lives. It can protect us, instigate us to seek knowledge, and above all, connect us with something greater. Throughout history, these figures have served as a reminder that nature and destiny are forces beyond our ability to manipulate. Therefore, it is essential to understand that fear, when well directed, can lead us to a path of self-knowledge and respect for the forces that surround us. In addition, the feared gods often symbolize the duality of life. They show us that just as there is light, there is also darkness. The balance between these forces is essential to our existence. When we reflect on these gods, we can realize that what we really fear often is the lack of control we feel in the face of the unknown. This reflection is an invitation for us to look within ourselves and face our own fears, seeking to understand what is really behind them. Throughout the centuries, these deities have been a point of reference for many who seek to understand their own place in the universe. They teach us that fear is not just a negative feeling, but an essential part of the human experience, which can lead us to grow and evolve. Thus, when we talk about the feared gods, we are, in fact, discussing our relationship with fear and the reverence we should have before the forces that shape our lives. This spiritual connection is an invitation for each of us to reflect on how we deal with our own gods, internal or external, and how this influences our journey. Ultimately, a true understanding of the feared gods reveals a profound aspect of the human condition, the incessant search for meaning and connection in a world full of uncertainty. This reflection invites us to an inner dialogue where we can find answers and, who knows, a little peace in the face of the mysteries of life. When we talk about the most feared gods in history, it is fascinating to note that they do not belong to a single tradition or culture. In fact, these deities are rooted in several mythologies, each with its own unique characteristics and stories that reflect the beliefs and fears of different societies throughout time. Let's explore some of these mythologies, which are like windows into the souls of ancient peoples. Egyptian mythology, for example, is rich in powerful and fearsome figures. One of the most notable gods is Set, the god of disorder and storms. He not only symbolizes violence and chaos, but also the struggle between good and evil. The Egyptians believed that Set was responsible for bringing night and the dangers it brought, such as predators that lurk in the darkness. Their reverence for him was so intense that, at certain times, they offered rituals and sacrifices to appease him, fearing the consequences. In Greek mythology, we find Hades, the god of the underworld. For many, he represented death and what comes after it. However, Hades was seen not only as a fearsome figure, but also as a just ruler who maintained order among the dead. The image of him, with his scepter and crown, evokes a deep respect, mixed with a certain fear. The belief in his ability to control the fate of every soul that departed this world was something that left the living in constant reflection on life and death. Norse cultures also brought their own feared deities, such as Loki. Although not a god in the traditional sense, Loki is a complex figure who represents trickery and disorder. He is feared not only for his mischief, but for the way he is able to manipulate events to cause chaos. This duality between being a troublemaker and a charismatic being makes him a fascinating figure in Norse mythology. Who could not identify with the struggle between the desire for freedom and the consequences that come with it? And we cannot forget Mesoamerican mythology, where gods such as Tlaloc, the gods of rain and fertility, play a fundamental role. Tlaloc was feared for his power over storms and droughts. People who depended on agriculture for their survival knew that Tlaloc's favor was crucial. Thus, their rituals were elaborate and often included sacrifices, as the hope of rain and good harvests was stronger than the fear they felt for this deity. These mythologies not only offer us insight into feared gods, but also teach us about human concerns and anxieties. Each divine figure reflects an aspect of the human condition, showing how societies related to the unknown and the incomprehensible. When I look at these stories, I realize that, regardless of the time or culture, human beings have always sought to understand and in some way control the fears that surround them. These deities, with their rich and complex stories, continue to resonate in our collective imagination. They remind us that fear can be both a destructive force and a source of wisdom. And by reflecting on these mythologies, we can find not only lessons about the past, but also about how to deal with the challenges we face in our lives today. The most feared gods in history are not just figures of worship, but entities with powers and attributes that defy human comprehension. In many cultures, these deities were seen as controlling fundamental aspects of existence, such as life and death, the forces of nature, and people's fates. I believe this idea resonates deeply with each of us. All of us, at some point, have felt the presence of something greater that watches over us and, at times, frightens us. It is this mix of fear and reverence that defines the relationship between human beings and these feared deities. One of the most common powers attributed to these gods is control over death. For example, Hades, the Greek god of the underworld, not only ruled over the dead, but was also responsible for their passage to the afterlife. His image was not only that of a dark ruler, but also that of a guardian, who ensured that the dead received their rightful place. This representation of control over the transition from life to death provokes intense fear in people who often feel powerless in the face of the inevitable. Another fascinating aspect is his ability to manipulate natural disasters. Consider Set, the Egyptian god of chaos and storms. He was feared not only for his destructive power, but also for his ability to bring sudden floods and devastating droughts. The ancient Egyptians' relationship with Set was complex. They feared him, but at the same time they understood that without him, the balance of nature could be disrupted. This duality shows how fear can be intertwined with the need to respect the forces we cannot control. In addition, many of these gods had the power to shape human destiny. The Norse goddess Norn, for example, was responsible for weaving the thread of each human being's destiny. The idea that our lives are in the hands of a deity who can change our path at any moment is undoubtedly a source of great fear. It leads us to reflect on how free we really are in our choices. Fear of fate is something that many of us face on a daily basis, and this connects our contemporary experience with ancient beliefs. The attributes of these gods are also noteworthy. They were often depicted with frightening features, such as serpents, horns, or eyes that seemed to penetrate the soul. These images were not just meant to impress, but were a constant reminder of the power that these deities held. When we look at these representations, we can feel a chill down our spine, as if, in some way, these entities were still present in our lives. This understanding of the powers and attributes of the most feared gods helps us to realize that fear is an intrinsic aspect of the human condition. It teaches us to respect the unknown and to accept that some forces are beyond our control. This reflection is essential, especially when we consider the challenges we face today. By acknowledging the presence of the uncontrollable in our lives, we can find a way to peace and acceptance. Thus, when we look to the past and the deities that inhabited it, we find not only awe, but also wisdom and understanding of our place in the universe. The cults and rituals associated with the most feared gods in history reveal much about the relationship that ancient societies had with the divine and the supernatural. The need to appease these deities, who were seen as bearers of power and often wrath, resulted in practices that ranged from simple offerings to elaborate human sacrifices. It is fascinating to think about how these rituals were carried out. These rituals were carried out on a large scale, mobilizing entire communities around a common belief. For example, in ancient Greece, Hades, the god of the underworld, was feared not only for his dominion over the dead, but also for the idea that he could take anyone to his realm if the proper rituals were not performed. The Greeks believed that in order to ensure safe passage to the other world, it was necessary to make sacrifices and offer food. This included everything from small offerings of fruit to whole animals. Personally, when studying these practices, I feel a deep connection with the human need to feel protected from the unknown. In Egyptian mythology, the god Set also demanded his share of worship. His cults were often marked by festivals that involved dancing and singing and, on occasion, sacrifices. Set was seen as a chaotic force, so the Egyptians sought not only to please him, but also to appease his wrath. Ceremonies were grand, and priests played a key role, acting as intermediaries between the people and the divine. The opening of the mouth ritual, for example, was a symbolic practice that ensured that the soul of the deceased would be able to eat, drink, and speak in the afterlife. Mesoamerican peoples, such as the Aztecs and Maya, had a very intense relationship with their deities, including Tlaloc, the god of rain. For them, water was vital for agriculture, and fear that Tlaloc would not bring enough rain led to the sacrifice of prisoners of war in grand ceremonies. These rituals were immensely complex, involving dances, flower offerings, and even the construction of elaborate temples. This interplay between the sacred and the everyday shows how fear and reverence can shape social practices. In addition, rituals often included elements of purification, such as bathing in rivers or the use of incense. This was not only to please the gods, but also to unify the community around a common purpose. I felt this when observing contemporary rituals that, although no longer directed towards feared gods, still carry the essence of seeking protection and hope. These cults and rituals were not only a way of worship, but also a way of dealing with the uncertainty of life. People came together in times of crisis or transition, seeking guidance and blessing from higher powers. This continues to be a relevant theme, even in our modern lives, where we often find ourselves searching for answers in difficult times. Thus, when reflecting on these cults and rituals, one realizes that they were more than religious practices. They were a reflection of the human condition, of the search for security, understanding, and connection with something greater. This need to feel protected and guided still resonates with us, even if the forms of expression have changed over the centuries. It is also interesting to note how the legacy of these gods manifests itself in spiritual practices and popular beliefs. Many still turn to rituals and symbols that, although no longer directly associated with the ancient gods, carry the weight of their stories. The search for protection, wisdom, and understanding of the spiritual world still leads people to connect with these ancient traditions, even if in an adapted way. Finally, when we analyze the legacy of the most feared gods, we realize that they are not only figures from the past, but also reflections of our inner and collective struggles. They teach us about the complexity of human existence and remind us that, despite the challenges, there is always room for hope and transformation. It is fascinating to see how these myths, which date back millennia, can still touch our lives in unexpected and profound ways. By recognizing the continuing influence of these gods in our culture, we are invited to reflect on what we fear and how these fears shape our realities. The legacy of the feared gods is, therefore, an invitation to introspection and a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.